Fighting between Sudan's army and RSF continues despite Eid ceasefire. Sporadic gunfire and airstrikes echoed across Khartoum despite promises by warring sides to cease fire for 3 days after a week of strife that has killed hundreds. Sounds of fighting continued overnight but appeared less intense on Saturday morning than on the previous day, a Reuters journalist in Khartoum said. Live broadcasts by regional news channels showed rising smoke and the thud of blasts. The army and the paramilitary RSF, which are waging a deadly power struggle across the country, had both issued statements saying they would uphold a 3-day ceasefire from Friday for the Islamic holiday of Eid al-Fitr. Sudan's sudden collapse into warfare has dashed plans to restore civilian rule, brought an already impoverished country to the brink of humanitarian catastrophe and threatened a wider conflict that could draw in outside powers. There has been no sign yet that either side can secure a quick victory or is ready to back down and talk. The army has air power, but the RSF is widely embedded in urban areas including around key facilities in central Khartoum. Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and rival Rapid Support Forces, RSF, leader Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, had held the top 2 positions on a ruling council overseeing a political transition after a 2021 military takeover that was meant to include a move to civilian rule and the RSF's merger into the army. The World Health Organization reported on Friday that 413 people had been killed and 3,551 injured since fighting broke out. The death toll includes at least 5 aid workers in a country reliant on food aid. International efforts to quell the violence have focused on the ceasefire, with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on them to honor the truce. Trump lays out timeline to end Ukraine conflict. The Republican firebrand claimed that if elected president in 2024, he would be able to get Moscow and Kiev to stop hostilities. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to put a swift end to the bloodshed in Ukraine should he be elected again in 2024. The Republican also trashed the incumbent Joe Biden's foreign policy, claiming it has made the world a more dangerous place. Speaking to his supporters in Fort Myers, Florida, on Friday, Trump said, "Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after we win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled. I'll get it settled very quickly." He explained that he knows both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky. Trump, who served as president from 2017 until 2021, claimed that he got along with the Russian head of state, and that Putin would not have launched his military campaign against Ukraine had Trump been in office. "It's still pretty easy for me to do," the Republican insisted, referring to ending the conflict that has gone on for more than a year. He went on to allege that other countries' leaders have lost respect for the U.S. under Biden's leadership because of his allegedly poor handling of America's foreign policy. To regain it, Trump argued, "You don't need bullets, you don't need tanks, you don't need weapons of any kind, you just need some common sense." The former U.S. president described himself as the only candidate who could promise to prevent the U.S. from getting involved in World War III. If these incompetent people remain in office, however, there will be a war like no other with belligerent parties using nuclear weapons, Trump warned. Last month, the Republican hopeful publicly asserted on at least 2 occasions that it would take him 24 hours to get Russia and Ukraine to end the fighting and negotiate if he were to be re-elected. Talks between Kiev and Moscow were suspended last April by the Ukrainian leadership. Kiev accused the retreating Russian military of committing atrocities in several Kiev suburbs, a claim Moscow has denied. In October of last year, President Zelensky signed a decree, ruling out talks with his Russian counterpart. That order was given after Russia absorbed 4 Ukrainian regions following referendums. The Kremlin maintains that it is open to peace negotiations in principle as long as Kiev relinquishes its claim to the territories and agrees to Russia's terms. Ukraine, in turn, says it is determined to resolve the issue by winning the conflict on the battlefield. Lack of arms? Start of Ukraine's counteroffensive reportedly postponed indefinitely. The US and its allies have already supplied arms to Ukraine worth billions of dollars, something that comes amid concerns over some of the weapons ending up on the black market. Kiev planned to begin a counteroffensive against Russian forces this month, but the lack of weapons has pushed the launch date back indefinitely, Ukrainian lawmaker Alexandra Ustinova told a U.S. news outlet. She claimed that the U.S. military delivered far less arms to Kiev than what Ukrainian Defense Minister Valery Zaluzhny has requested that the Pentagon provide. The outlet also cited an unnamed Ukrainian source as saying that we, as a military, want to have all the weapons now, but of course it's impossible in the current situation. Of course we need the jets, but it's not a question of the coming months, to be honest, the source added. Referring to the US-made F-16 multi-role fighter deliveries, which the outlet said are still tied down in internal debates in the Biden administration. The claims come as another U.S. newspaper reported that even the quicker-than-expected delivery of American Abrams tanks to Ukraine would not likely reach the battlefield in time for the start of an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive, one in which Western allies appear to have fallen short of providing the weapons that U.S. military officials believe Kiev needs. Earlier this week, U.S. media reported that 31 Abrams tanks would arrive in Germany soon, with training expected to last 10 weeks. The tanks could reach Ukraine by the fall, the reports argued. The American newspaper referred to documents that were among the Pentagon's leaked classified military assessments of the Ukraine conflict showing that U.S. military planners believe that 253 tanks are needed for the coming counteroffensive. As of late February, however, only 200 had been committed, and of those, 60 were made by Western manufacturers, the kind of sophisticated weaponry that Ukraine has requested, according to the documents. This followed a U.S. magazine quoting one leaked Pentagon document as saying that the commencement date for Kiev's counteroffensive against Russia has been set for April 30. The document reportedly refers to military equipment deliveries and a training timetable for 9 Ukrainian brigades that, with assistance from the U.S. and its allies, can be generated for the spring counteroffensive. According to the documents, 3 more brigades are anticipated to be recruited internally in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, meanwhile, stressed that Moscow had looked into the leaked materials which first appeared in a chat on the Discord social platform earlier this month. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, for his part, suggested that some of the files could be part of a deception campaign against Moscow. Alexei Martynov, head of the Moscow-based International Institute of the Newly Established States, a think tank, in turn told Sputnik that the leak might be the US attempt to divert attention from American journalist Seymour Hersh's investigation into explosions at the Nord Stream gas pipeline network, which Hersh insists was the work of the Biden administration. Most probably, the so-called leak is nothing more than an organized information intervention through their own media channels in order to cheer up the agenda and distract attention from the overly annoying Hersh, whom the US cannot stop from investigating in this situation. Martynov said. Since the start of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, Washington and its NATO allies have sent billions of dollars worth of weapons to Kiev. This came amid concerns over the corruption in the Ukrainian government and the fact that some of the Western countries' arms supplies to Kiev finally ended up on the black market. Russia has repeatedly warned that the West's military aid to Kiev would add to prolonging the Ukraine conflict and make Western countries direct parties to the standoff, thereby confirming accusations that NATO is waging a proxy war against Moscow. U.S. Supreme Court preserves broad access to abortion pill. The U.S. Supreme Court on Friday blocked new restrictions set by lower courts on a widely used abortion pill, a decision welcomed by President Joe Biden as his administration defends broad access to the drug in the latest fierce legal battle over reproductive rights in the United States. The justices, in a brief order, granted emergency requests by the Justice Department and the pill's manufacturer Danko Laboratories to put on hold an April 7 preliminary injunction issued by U.S. District Judge Matthew Kaczmarek in Texas. The judge's order would have greatly limited the availability of mifepristone while litigation proceeds in a challenge by anti-abortion groups to the pill's federal regulatory approval. As a result of the Supreme Court's stay, mifepristone remains available and approved for safe and effective use while we continue this fight in the courts, Biden said in a statement issued by the White House. The stakes could not be higher for women across America. I will continue to fight politically driven attacks on women's health, Biden added. Conservative Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito publicly dissented from the decision. Alito, in a brief opinion, wrote that the administration and Danko did not show that they were likely to suffer irreparable harm. Biden's administration is seeking to defend mifepristone in the face of mounting abortion bans and restrictions enacted by Republican-led states since the Supreme Court in June 2022 overturned the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that had legalized the procedure nationwide. Alito authored that ruling. The current case now returns to the New Orleans-based Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is set to hear arguments on May 17. The losing side after the Fifth Circuit rules could appeal the case back to the Supreme Court. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, the U.S. agency that signs off on the safety of food products, drugs, and medical devices, approved mifepristone in 2000. The challengers contend that the FDA illegally approved mifepristone and then removed critical safeguards on what they call a dangerous drug. Mifepristone is taken with another drug called misoprostol to perform medication abortion, which accounts for more than half of all U.S. abortions. The drug has other uses including management of miscarriages. I continue to stand by FDA's evidence-based approval of mifepristone, and my administration will continue to defend FDA's independent, expert authority to review, approve, and regulate a wide range of prescription drugs, Biden said. Taiwanese foreign minister predicts timeline for conflict with China. The self-governing island's top diplomat, Joseph Wu, told the media that Beijing may be planning a military offensive in 2027. A military conflict between China and Taiwan could take place in 2027, the self-governing island's foreign minister Joseph Wu has claimed. Appearing on the UK's LBC radio station on Thursday, Wu said, "We are taking the Chinese military threat very seriously. I think 2027 is the year that we need to be serious about." He expressed hope that like-minded partners, the UK included, can stop China from initiating any war against Taiwan. Reuters revealed last month that the British government had approved a considerable increase in exports of submarine parts and technology to Taiwan in 2022. It followed a call by former Prime Minister Liz Truss for a global NATO to arm Taipei in the same way the alliance was arming Kiev. Wu's assessment of China-Taiwan relations echoes that outlined by CIA Director William Burns in February. Appearing on CBS Face the Nation, he claimed that President Xi has instructed the PLA, the Chinese military leadership, to be ready by 2027 to invade Taiwan. He added, however, that this alone does not mean Beijing had decided to invade in 2027 or any other year. A month prior to Burns' comments, NBC cited an internal memo by General Mike Minihan, the head of the U.S. Air Mobility Command, AMC, in which he told his staff that fighting over the island could break out within 2 years. However, while an AMC spokesperson confirmed the authenticity of the memo, an anonymous Pentagon official told the outlet that these comments are not representative of the department's view on China. On Friday, Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang warned that those who play with fire on the question of Taiwan will burn themselves. He insisted that Beijing will never back down in the face of any act that undermines China's sovereignty and security. Earlier this month, the country's state-run CCTV channel quoted President Xi as calling on the military to step up training oriented toward actual combat. Taiwan has been de facto independent since 1949, when the losing side in the Chinese Civil War fled to the island and established its own administration. While only a handful of nations have recognized Taiwan as a sovereign state, the U.S. has long maintained close, unofficial ties with Taipei, both militarily and economically. Formally, Washington still professes to adhere to the One China principle. Beijing considers the island to be an inalienable part of its territory that has been seized by separatists. While the Chinese leadership says it prioritizes a peaceful reunification, it has not ruled out military options. Japanese forces to increase readiness over N. Korea's possible satellite launch. Japanese Defense Minister Yasukazu Hamada has instructed the country's self-defense forces to be at enhanced readiness over a possible launch of a rocket carrying North Korea's first military reconnaissance satellite over the Japanese territory, a Japanese news agency reported on Saturday, citing government sources. Earlier in the week, the North Korean state-run news agency said that the country's leader Kim Jong-un had ordered the country's first military reconnaissance satellite, which had been already completed, to be launched on a carrier rocket at the planned date. The news agency provided no details regarding the exact date of the launch. Japan's forces are expected to deploy the Patriot Advanced Capability 3 system and destroyer warships equipped with Aegis and Standard Missile 3 systems to intercept North Korea's rocket if necessary, according to media. We will make preparations to be able to respond to any circumstance that could cause damage to Japan, government sources told the Japanese news agency. Last week, North Korea tested a new Hwasong-18 solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, which was launched toward the Sea of Japan, flying about 1,000 kilometers, 621 miles, and landing outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. Japan, in turn, requested an emergency session of the UN Security Council and on Monday took part in missile defense exercises in the East Sea international waters together with the US and South Korea. What is happening in Sudan? Timeline. On Thursday, April 20, United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres appealed for a 3-day ceasefire in Sudan to mark the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Fitr. He said it would enable trapped civilians to escape, seek medical treatment, food, and other essentials. More than 300 people have been killed and more than 3,000 wounded in Sudan since fighting between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, broke out April 15. Here is a look at Sudan's political turmoil in recent years leading to the current clashes between the army and the main paramilitary group. December 2018, hundreds protest in the northern city of Atbara against rising food costs. A broader economic crisis sparks demonstrations that quickly spread to Khartoum and other cities. Security services respond to the protests with tear gas and gunfire. April 2019, hundreds of thousands of protesters stage a sit-in outside army headquarters in Khartoum. Within days, the army overthrows and detains Omar al-Bashir, ending his 30-year rule. Protesters continue to demand the handover of power to civilians. June 2019, security forces raid the army headquarters sit-in. Armed men linked to the RSF militia kill at least 128 people in the capital. August 2019, following mediation by the African Union and Ethiopia, civilian leaders supporting the rebellion sign a constitutional declaration to share power with the military during a transitional period leading to elections. Following this, Abdallah Hamdok, an economist and ex-UN official, is appointed to lead the government. December 2019, ousted President Omar al-Bashir is convicted of corruption and sentenced to 2 years in a correctional center. August 2020, transitional authorities reach a peace agreement with some rebel groups in the western Darfur region and southern areas of South Kordofan and Blue Nile. However, two significant groups do not agree to the terms of the deal. October 2020, Sudan agrees to normalize ties with Israel in a deal brokered by the U.S., joining other Arab states. Within 2 months, the U.S. removed Sudan from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. June 2021, Sudan receives approval for $56 billion in foreign debt relief after implementing economic reforms under the supervision of the International Monetary Fund. October 2021, security forces carry out pre-dawn raids, detaining top civilians including Hamdok, following weeks of bitter disagreements between civilian and military factions and a failed coup attempt. Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan declares that the civilian government and other transitional bodies have been dissolved. November 2021, Following mass rallies against the coup and suspension of most international financial aid to Sudan, military leaders and Hamdok announce a deal to reinstate him as prime minister. Hamdok returns to his position, he says, to prevent further violence and safeguard economic reforms. January 2022, Abdallah Hamdok resigns amid continuing demonstrations and his inability to form a new government. June 2022, the UN World Food Programme says more than a third of Sudan's population faces food insecurity due to ongoing political, economic, and climate shocks. October 2022, on the first anniversary of the coup, Sudan witnesses one of the largest turnouts in the anti-military protest campaign. In Khartoum, demonstrators are met with tear gas and stun grenades, and in the neighboring city of Omdurman, a civilian is killed, making it the 119th recorded protest-related death. December 2022, an agreement is signed between civilian groups sidelined by the coup and the military to start a new, two-year political transition and appoint a civilian government. April 2023, the signing of a final agreement for the transition is postponed for a second time due to disputes including the integration of the Rapid Support Forces, a powerful paramilitary group, into the armed forces and the question of placing the army under civilian supervision. The Sudanese army raises concerns that the mobilization of the RSF could result in confrontation between the two factions. On April 15, clashes erupted between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF near the army headquarters and airport in Khartoum, as well as other vital military locations throughout the nation. The SAF conducts airstrikes against RSF troops, who retaliate with artillery and anti-aircraft weapons, transforming the central region of Khartoum into a battleground. German tanks pose problems for Ukraine, foreign policy. The hardware donated by 8 countries reportedly fires different rounds, making it impossible for Kiev to buy munitions in bulk. Ukraine will likely have to procure a range of different munitions, rather than a single type, for German-made Leopard tanks, supplied by some of its Western backers, Foreign Policy has reported. On Thursday, the media outlet claimed that the vehicles provided to Kiev, by 8 countries, are not uniform in terms of the shells they fire. The article also highlighted the supposed inadequacy of air defenses that have already been supplied. Foreign Policy wrote that the Leopard tanks arriving from 8 different countries fire different rounds, meaning that Ukrainians can't buy munitions for their newly tricked-out ground forces in bulk. As for Abrams tanks, which the US has pledged to donate, these will likely take months to actually arrive on the battlefield, the outlet noted. According to the article, Ukraine is also facing severe shortages of modern air defense systems. The country reportedly has enough to cover just a few cities. To make matters worse, the Hawk missile systems provided by Washington have been shipped without radars, Foreign Policy claimed. The setbacks are supposedly holding up Kiev's planned spring counteroffensive, and causing discontent among the Ukrainian leadership. The media outlet cited President Vladimir Zelensky's calls on the West to step up its military support for Ukraine late last month. Echoing that sentiment, Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, lamented to the Associated Press earlier this week that some of Ukraine's backers promise one thing and do a completely different one. The official also made it clear that nobody will start unprepared, referring to the planned counteroffensive. A Ukrainian MP quoted by Foreign Policy claimed that the push had originally been planned for April, but had to be postponed indefinitely due to the lack of weapons necessary to pull it off. On Friday, the New York Times published a report saying that as of late February Kiev had only 200 of the 253 tanks that U.S. military officials deemed sufficient for a successful counteroffensive. The paper, citing leaked Pentagon documents, noted that the majority of hardware was of Soviet design. The NYT also claimed that the US and its allies were having difficulty keeping up with Ukraine's demand for artillery shells. Size does matter. Melbourne overtakes Sydney as Australia's most populous city. The small yet significant difference in population surfaced during the latest census. Melbourne became Australia's most populous city, surpassing Sydney, which had held the title for over a century. According to official statistics, there are now almost 19,000 more citizens in Melbourne than in Sydney. It all boils down to a boundary change, since the Melton suburbs were included into the city. Until the 2021 census definition, the Sydney significant area had a higher population than Melbourne. However, with the amalgamation of Melton into Melbourne in the latest classification, Melbourne has more people than Sydney, and has had since 2018, a representative of the Australian Bureau of Statistics reportedly told a local newspaper. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS, includes any connecting suburbs with more than 10,000 people as part of a city's significant urban area. It should be noted that Melbourne used to be Australia's most populous city for a solid period, thanks to the late 19th century gold rush that sparked an influx of migrants. However, in 1905, Sydney took over the mantle of the continent's most populous city and has held this title until 2023. Kenya offers to host mediation process to resolve crisis in Sudan. Kenyan President William Ruto on Friday offered to host a process of mediation between warring parties in Sudan to help restore peace in the country. In a statement issued in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi, Ruto said Kenya has a strong track record in effectively facilitating peacemaking and settlement of the political conflict in the region. We make this offer in the spirit of brotherhood, peace, and solidarity as an acceptable neutral venue and also as an engaged stakeholder well seized with the challenges facing our region, said Ruto. He said Kenya is strongly persuaded that a peacefully negotiated solution to the conflict in Sudan is within reach and, as always, stands ready to make her contribution. Ruto appreciated the gesture by the parties to the political framework agreement to cease hostilities in response to the call by the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. Heads of State Summit on April 16 and subsequently the African Union, OAS emergency ministerial meeting on the situation held in Ethiopia on April 20. Fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces broke out on April 15. Forcing civilians to flee and seek shelter from the hostilities. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands injured. The statement came as almost 400 people have died in the unrest and almost 3,500 more have been wounded in Khartoum, the western region of Darfur, and other states, according to the World Health Organization. The Central Committee of Sudan doctors said both sides seemed to have ignored ceasefire calls to mark the end of Ramadan as several areas of Khartoum were bombed and reported shelling and clashes on Friday. Ruto urged the IGAD, and UN to mobilize an effective international coalition to support a comprehensive peacemaking agenda for the war-torn country. Our region bears deep scars of conflict and war, the sorrow of loved ones lost to death, the trauma of humanitarian suffering and disrupted livelihoods, and the haunting regret of missed opportunities. There is a strong yearning for peace throughout the Horn of Africa, and Sudan is no exception, he said. According to Ruto, there now exists a meaningful opportunity for the resolution of outstanding issues through peaceful negotiation. This, he said, will lead to the restoration of peace, security, and stability in Sudan in conformity with the broader objective of transforming the Horn of Africa and Eastern Africa in general into a peaceful and secure hub of productivity, globally competitive industry, and sustainable shared prosperity. Vatican refuses to commit grave sin, media. Church officials have reportedly refused a London court's request for private messages linked to a real estate row. A representative of the Vatican has said in a court filing that it would be a grave sin for the Church to be forced to disclose communications between an archbishop and a cardinal in a UK trial related to a disputed real estate deal, according to a report by Bloomberg. The violation of the pontifical secret is deemed a grave sin, Carlos Ferrando Diaz Paniagua, a Roman Catholic priest and lawyer, declared in documents filed with a London court in March. The pontifical secret, also referred to as papal secrecy, refers to an oath taken by members of the Church designed to protect the distribution of sensitive information. It stands, Diaz Paniagua added to the court, regardless of any grave or urgent considerations or the need to protect the common good. The legal request for various emails and text messages stems from a 2018 claim by the Vatican that it was defrauded by financier Raffaele Mincian and his companies in the $383 million sale of a former Harrods warehouse in London's high-end Chelsea district. 10 people, including an Italian cardinal, have been accused by Vatican prosecutors in relation to various fraud and embezzlement charges amid allegations that the property had been sold at an inflated price. The Vatican has claimed it could lose as much as $186 million in its purchase of the site, which was intended to be developed into luxury apartments, and that it was improperly advised throughout the proceedings. Mincian, who is a defendant in the Vatican case, has in turn sued the Church in the aforementioned London civil trial. He claims that his reputation has been damaged by the Vatican's accusations against him. In 2020, he petitioned the London court for a declaration that he had acted in good faith throughout his role in the real estate deal, a ruling his legal team believes would assist him in the separate trial brought by the Vatican. As part of the civil case, Mincian's lawyers sought a trove of digital communications between high-ranking church officials Cardinal Pietro Parolin and Archbishop Edgar Pinapera. Diaz-Paniagua claimed in response that emails and text messages between the pair are irrelevant to the case, while the Vatican has said messages protected by pontifical secret are akin to state secrets. Lawyers representing Mincian have declined to comment. The Vatican has until April 28 to decide if it intends to maintain pontifical secret as its reason for refusal to comply with a court request. Mideast restores regional relations because it can't depend on US anymore. Journalist and podcaster Rania Khalek believes that re-establishing relations between Middle Eastern governments contributes to their own national interests and signals the decline of U.S. hegemony. The region now relies on China and Russia brokering negotiations between the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia has taken the lead in an effort to reintegrate Syria into the Arab League. This, the expert told Sputnik, is peculiar given that Saudi Arabia played a significant role in kicking Syria out of the Arab League in the first place. The kingdom, however, is first to seek the repairing of its relationship with Syria since 2011. Khalek noted that the Chinese involvement in Middle East politics shows how dramatically regional politics have shifted in recent years as most of the negotiations, she said, were brokered by Beijing, including a bit of truce between previous rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran. Meanwhile, American overvision or even any grade of involvement in these talks is not observed, while China stands out as a neutral arbiter. Beijing, unlike Washington, doesn't interfere in elections or tell countries who should and shouldn't be their leader. This is one of the main reasons why countries such as China and Russia are chosen as brokers. The fact that Saudi Arabia is turning to China to negotiate with Iran does show a huge shift in power relations in the world, Khalek supposed. The podcaster went on to argue that the CIA expressed frustration over the announced truce deal between Tehran and Riyadh, noticing that the U.S. feels blindsided by this deal and the fact that it was overseen by the Chinese. She believes Saudi Arabia is looking to balance among powerful players. In a growing multipolar era, the Saudis are trying to maintain good relations with everybody. So that's why the Saudis, that's why the Emiratis. That's why all of these countries are trying to deal with their own neighborhood because they understand that if the US is in decline, they cannot depend on the US like the way they used to, and they have to be able to forge a stable path for the future. That might be a future where the US is not the dominant power, the journalist emphasized. Finally, she added that sanctions on Syria imposed by the U.S. completely ruined the economy of this Middle East country, due to the U.S. having overwhelming economic influence. The sanctions, however, were completely illegal by international law, as the U.S. had no legitimate right to intervene into Syria's internal policy. China vows to maintain sound operation of Forex market. China's foreign exchange regulator said on Friday that the country's forex market got off to a steady start in the first quarter of the year, with the exchange rate of its currency, the renminbi, or yuan, remaining stable and only appreciating slightly. Wang Chunying, Deputy Director General of the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, SAFE, said at a press conference that China's forex market remains relatively stable and cross-border capital flows are becoming more balanced. According to bank foreign exchange transactions data, in the first quarter of 2023, forex sales of Chinese banks amounted to $561.3 billion in US dollars, while forex purchases reached $546 billion. This resulted in a deficit of $15.3 billion. When calculated in yuan terms, forex sales totaled 3.84 trillion yuan, while forex purchases reached 3.74 trillion yuan, resulting in a deficit of 105.5 billion yuan. In terms of bank foreign exchange payments and receipts, China recorded a surplus of $34.2 billion, with foreign exchange receipts totaling $1.46 trillion, and foreign exchange payments totaling $1.45 trillion. When calculated in yuan terms, the country recorded a surplus of 232.9 billion yuan, with foreign exchange receipts totaling 10.17 trillion yuan and foreign exchange payments totaling 9.93 trillion yuan. Wang said the overall momentum of growth in the first quarter indicated that the country's economy is resurging and continuing to rebound. In 2023, China will continue to deepen reforms in the forex sector, steadily promote high-quality opening up of its capital account in an orderly manner, improve cross-border trade and investment, and continuously improve the management of forex reserves with Chinese characteristics, she said. Russia to drop dollar, euro in energy trade, Deputy PM. Most settlements for oil, gas, and other resources are already made in national currencies. Russia is switching to national currencies in energy trade with foreign partners, Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said on Saturday in an interview with the Russia One TV channel. According to the official, most transactions are already made in these currencies, mostly in Chinese yuan and Russian rubles, and in the future Moscow intends to abandon the euro and dollar in energy exports altogether. The trends have changed greatly toward reducing the use of dollars and euros. Considering the current problems with these currencies, in our settlements we are switching almost exclusively to national currencies, he said, referring to economic restrictions placed on Russia by Western states due to the Ukraine conflict, which have effectively made it impossible for Russia to conduct transactions in euros and dollars. Our partners in China are already paying for gas in yuan, as well as partly for oil. They also pay in rubles. We will continue to improve these mutual settlements in national currencies, Novak pledged. The deputy premier said that in order to meet strong demand for Russian energy, settlement mechanisms are needed which can only be in national currencies under the current circumstances. In an earlier interview with TASS news agency, Novak predicted that the share of transactions in national currencies will continue to grow in the coming years. Russia significantly increased the use of national currencies in trade last year, moving away from the euro and dollar in transactions with foreign partners as these currencies were deemed unreliable due to sanctions. Why is China boosting its gold reserves? While between September 2019 and October 2022, China's gold reserves remained unchanged, November of last year saw Beijing push to bulk up on bullion. China is boosting its gold reserves for a fifth straight month because Beijing is preparing for possible future sanctions against the PRC, industry experts have told an international news outlet. Chinese scholar and finance author Sun Xiaoji said that China's central bank is actively increasing its gold holdings as it hasn't excluded a scenario where it is expelled from the global US dollar payment system. Domestically, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, advertises that it is proactively challenging the United States and de-dollarizing, but the real reason is that it knows it will be sanctioned by the United States sooner or later. Therefore it is looking for an alternative to the US dollar, and the only alternative is gold, Sun argued. The expert also commented on the current push for de-dollarization by the BRICS group, of which China is a member. The group also includes Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa. Sun said the reason for de-dollarization among the BRICS countries is not that China and Russia have decided to proactively scrap their use of the US dollar. He claimed the matter is that the recent wave of globalization has come to an end, and that the world is about to enter a stage of regional development or even inter-regional confrontation. UK-based financial consultant Fang Qi, in turn, told the outlet that he believes China's central bank has reduced its holdings of US bonds and increased Chinese gold reserves mainly out of concern for rates of return and reducing volatility. The remarks come a few weeks after People's Bank of China raised its gold reserves by about 18 tons, following the hiatus that was in place between September 2019 and October 2022. The country's total stockpiles of bullions currently sit at about 2,068 tons, after growing by about 102 tons in the 4 months before March. The developments followed China clinching a deal with Brazil late last month to trade in their own currencies, in a bid to abandon the US dollar as an intermediary. Western media, in turn, reported at the time that the deal is expected to enable China, the top rival to US economic hegemony, and Brazil, the biggest economy in Latin America, to conduct their massive trade and financial transactions directly, exchanging yuan for reals and vice versa instead of going through the dollar. A recent survey report by the Central Bank of Brazil showed that as of the end of 2022, the proportion of the yuan in Brazil's international exchange reserves had reached 5.37%, exceeding the proportion of the euro at 4.74%. Which means that the yuan became the South American country's second largest reserve currency. India and Bangladesh ditching dollar in trade, media. The countries have reportedly agreed to settle a quota of transactions in their own currencies. India and Bangladesh are moving away from using the US dollar in bilateral trade, the Bangladesh-based news website The Business Standard reported this week. According to the report, the two countries have reached a deal that will see a part of trade transactions carried out in their respective domestic currencies, the rupee and the taka. New Delhi and Dhaka have reportedly been discussing the step for months. However, they are not planning to ditch the dollar from trade completely, the news outlet noted. It is expected that exports from Bangladesh to India, which were about $2 billion in 2022, will be fully switched to rupees and takas, while $2 billion worth of Indian exports to Bangladesh, out of roughly $13.69 billion as of the previous fiscal year, will be paid for in rupees. The rest will continue to be paid in dollars, the news outlet states. In order to facilitate the transactions, two of Bangladesh's banks, Sonali Bank and Eastern Bank, will open accounts with two Indian lenders, the State Bank of India, SBI, and ICICI Bank, and vice versa. Afzal Karim, CEO and Managing Director of Sonali Bank, told the news outlet that more banks from both countries will also gradually join the process. He noted that switching to domestic currencies in bilateral trade will help each country reduce pressure on its US dollar holdings. According to Bangladesh India Chamber of Commerce and Industry President Abdul Matlub Ahmed, who was cited in the report, there are still some procedural issues in switching from the US dollar to domestic currencies in trade. He noted, however, that businesses have for some time been calling on the central banks of the two nations to allow the switch, and welcome the decision. The procedural steps are being taken care of. However, it may take several months for transactions in taka and rupee to start, Matlub Ahmed added. Earlier this month, India unveiled its new foreign trade policy for 2023, whose centerpiece is shifting away from the dollar and boosting the use of the rupee in foreign trade. The country also recently agreed a switch to rupee payment mechanisms for Iranian crude imports and trade with Malaysia. Overall, India currently has rupee trade mechanisms with 18 countries, including Russia. Is Yellen extending oil branch to China with tongue-in-cheek? U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has called for constructive and healthy economic relations with China at a time when the Biden administration is pushing for unprecedented limits on American investments in the People's Republic. This speech by the Secretary of the U.S. Treasury aims to find a common ground with China, in light of the increasing geopolitical power of China across the global economy, where the U.S. soft power has been diminishing considerably. Owing to, among other factors, the ongoing de-dollarization process that a number of Asian, African, as well as Latin American countries have been entering into recently, Sergio Rossi, professor of macroeconomics and monetary economics at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland, said to the media. Janet Yellen is aware of the fact that the U.S. administration has lost both its financial and geopolitical powers to steer the global economy in its own interests, and her speech is addressed to China and, more largely, to the BRICS member countries. With the intention to give rise to a multipolar international monetary regime where the US dollar will still have a major role to play, but only within a rather little part of the global economy, also as a result of the increasing fragmentation of globalization. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic crisis and the energy crisis that is currently affecting several so-called advanced economies negatively. On April 20, Yellen delivered a speech on US-China economic relations at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. She insisted that China's economic growth need not be incompatible with U.S. economic leadership, adding that Washington does not seek to decouple its economy from China's. The Treasury Secretary went on saying that the Biden administration's economic strategy is focused on investing in American infrastructure, clean energy, and technology manufacturing, not suppressing or containing any other economy. Yellen further called on Beijing to cooperate with Washington in order to tackle global challenges, including climate change and the indebtedness of countries. Limits on U.S. investments and EU CHIPS Act. It appears, however, that Yellen is extending the olive branch to China with tongue-in-cheek. Earlier this week, the U.S. mainstream media reported that the Biden administration has been working on unprecedented rules aimed at curtailing U.S. investments in the People's Republic. U.S. officials have already started briefing industry groups like the Chamber of Commerce on President Joe Biden's forthcoming executive order, which will require companies to notify the government of new investments in Chinese tech firms and bar deals in critical sectors like semiconductors. The expected move is just one in a series of restrictions slapped on China by the Biden administration and its predecessors. Last year, the U.S. President signed the CHIPS and Science Act into law to provide roughly $280 billion to domestic high-tech industries while prohibiting funding recipients from expanding semiconductor manufacturing in China. Furthermore, the White House apparently pressured its European allies to pass similar legislation earlier this week. In addition, the U.S. is escalating tensions over Taiwan by stepping up military aid to the island, which is considered by China as an inalienable part of the country. Yellen's remarks come in sharp contrast to the overall China policy pursued by the Biden administration, according to Rossi. These economic policy decisions are indeed a last-minute attempt to curb the declining trend of the U.S. economy, in regard to both commercial and financial transactions across the world, trying thereby to limit economic growth as well as development of China with a series of limitations that, as a matter of fact, contrast with the basic principles of a free market economy, which the USA claims to be, said Rossi. In short, the US has adopted a doubtful strategy that can be phrased as follows: do what I say but not what I do. The current geopolitical tensions between Eurasian countries are induced by this strategy of the United States, but will not enable this country to recover its hegemonic power across the global economy, because, now, there are some other major players that can affect the path of such an economy, also in light of their collaboration and cooperation with regard to financial integration and multilateral trade agreements, which emasculate the use of the US dollar as a weapon to induce the world economy operating in the interests of the United States, he continued. US trying to calm tensions with friendly rhetoric. BRICS, an acronym for 5 developing nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are currently pushing for de-dollarization and creating a common currency. Likewise, Brazil and Argentina are mulling over a common currency for Mercosur, the southern common market consisting of major South American economies. The push for de-dollarization and shifting to national currencies and settling trade deals, including for energy commodities, has been supported by Middle Eastern and Asian players. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has gone even further by seeking to reduce dependence not only on the greenback, but also on the euro, yen, and British pound in financial transactions. According to U.S. economists, the de-dollarization trend seems especially disturbing since shrinking demand for the greenback could complicate Washington's ability to print dollars to pay its bills. They noted that as long as the dollar remains the dominant reserve currency and is used to settle most international payments, U.S. deficits are financed by countries holding their foreign reserves in U.S. dollar securities. To complicate matters even further, the U.S. is still trying to curb inflation and galloping prices through the Federal Reserve's aggressive rate hikes, which have backfired on U.S. regional banks. The collapse of 3 Californian banks, the financial turmoil in the crypto assets area, mounting inflationary pressures and the U.S. federal government debt issues have shown that the U.S. economy actually is moving along a dangerous downward path. Also, with respect to the better economic performance of its main competitors across the global economy, notably China, which is quite reluctant in continuing to finance the U.S. twin deficits, that is, both the fiscal and the trade deficits of the U.S. economy, Rossi pointed out. According to the expert, the U.S. economic problems have prompted the U.S. administration, and particularly the Treasury Secretary, to address these issues with a series of open-mouth operations intending to improve the political relationships with the other major players in the global economy. Putin and Saudi Crown Prince discuss OPEC Plus deal, Kremlin. The two sides expressed satisfaction with the cooperation aimed at ensuring global oil market stability. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman held a phone conversation on Friday, the Kremlin press service has said. The two leaders discussed various issues, ranging from cooperation in the oil market to efforts in resolving regional crises in the Middle East. The parties discussed several key topics on the bilateral agenda, with an emphasis on further expanding mutually beneficial ties in trade, economic cooperation, investment, and energy, the Kremlin readout said. It added that both sides expressed satisfaction with the level of coordination at OPEC Plus aimed at ensuring global oil market stability and that the prospects for cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the BRICS were also considered. The OPEC Plus alliance emerged in 2016, forged by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, dominated by Saudi Arabia, and a group of other major oil producers led by Russia. Earlier this month, some of the leading producers within the OPEC Plus group announced voluntary extra curbs of 1.16 million barrels per day, BPD, starting from May until the end of 2023. The cuts came on top of a 500,000 BPD reduction in Russian output and a 2 million BPD reduction in the production targets in effect since last November. OPEC Plus argued the move was needed to protect the oil markets from volatility, although it faced criticism from other organizations. The International Energy Agency, IEA, asserted the move would likely aggravate an oil supply deficit and threaten the global economic recovery rather than help markets. Apart from discussing oil-related issues, Putin and bin Salman discussed peacemaking efforts in the Middle East, the Kremlin press service said. It did not elaborate which flashpoints in the troubled region they discussed. The two leaders exchanged views on various aspects of the developments in the Middle East in the context of the efforts Russia and Saudi Arabia are participating in to resolve regional crises, the statement reads. There have been indications in recent weeks suggesting that the wars in Yemen and in Syria in particular may be nearing their ends through the ongoing diplomatic effort of various parties. Earlier this month, Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Miqdad made a breakthrough visit to Saudi Arabia, the first such trip since Riyadh cut diplomatic relations with Damascus in 2012. Following the visit, Saudi Arabia publicly endorsed Syrian unity and integrity, and backed a political solution to the 12-year-long war. Last month, China mediated an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran to normalize relations, with the milestone triggering peace talks to end the 8-year-long conflict in Yemen, which has largely been fueled by a long-time rivalry between Tehran and Riyadh. China's remote sensing satellites help protect Earth's environment. China's remote sensing satellites have played prominent roles in observing and protecting the Earth's environment by providing pivotal data and clues for economic development, infrastructure construction, natural disaster rescue and mitigation as well as ecological protection. With over 200 such satellites making unremitting contributions. At present, China has over 200 remote sensing satellites in orbit for all-weather, high-resolution Earth observation from a celestial angle of view with multiple breakthroughs in this field, according to the China National Space Administration, CNSA. The CNSA said China has over 300 satellites weighing over 300 kilograms respectively in orbit, ranking second in the world. There are over 200 in-orbit remote sensing satellites, which can generate daily global coverage satellite data at a resolution of 16 meters and optical data at a 2-meter resolution within a one-day global revisit. It takes them 5 hours to revisit any region in the world using 1-meter resolution radar. A national platform for remote sensing data and application services launched by CNSA last year facilitates easy access to remote sensing data from China. For example, a high-definition image of the Beijing Daxing International Airport captured by the GF-1 satellite clearly shows the airport's terminal buildings and tidy runways from a celestial perspective. This is a huge advantage of our remote sensing images. The planning and construction departments can monitor whether it is built according to the plan based on remote sensing images, and the engineering department can supervise the quality of the project, said Xing Jin, a researcher with the Earth Observation System and Data Center under the CNSA. The Yaogan series satellites are designed to study the Earth's surface, assess crop yields and provide clues for natural disaster rescue and mitigation efforts. They are an operational tool for weather forecasting and climate change research through mapping, supervising, and monitoring the Earth. The first Chinese remote sensing satellite of the Yaogan series was launched into orbit in 2006. Study reveals why whales roll on seafloor. The scholars behind the new study believe that whales engage in this activity in order to rid themselves of ectoparasites and dead skin. Researchers from the Griffith University in Australia have gained new insight into the grooming habits of humpback whales. Between August 2021 and October 2022, marine ecologist Dr. Olof Manek monitored whales via tracking tags capable of recording audio and video footage. The data procured revealed that whales sometimes performed full and side rolls on the sandy seafloor in shallow waters, likely to remove dead skin and to get rid of barnacles. On all occasions of sand rolling, the whales were observed on video to be slowly moving forward with their head first into the sand followed by rolling to one side or a full roll, Manek said as quoted in a press release by the Griffith University. During the different deployments, the sand rolling was observed in the context of socializing. The behavior was either following courtship, competition, or other forms of socializing, he added. So we believe that the whales exfoliate using the sand to assist with molting and removal of ectoparasites such as barnacle and specifically select areas suitable for this behavior. The researcher also observed that humpback whales can remove some, but not all, barnacles and dead skin by performing surface activities such as breaches. The study, authored by Manek and his colleagues from Griffith University and from Stanford University in the U.S., was published last month in the Journal of Marine Science and Engineering. China releases 3 commercial liquid rocket engines. The Academy of Aerospace Propulsion Technology on Saturday released 3 commercial liquid rocket engines in Xi'an City of northwest China's Shaanxi province. In an effort to promote the development of China's commercial space industry and enhance the ability to enter space on a large scale and at a low cost. The 3 engines released feature high reliability, high cost performance ratio and reusability. Among them, the YF-102 is the country's first open-type liquid oxygen kerosene engine, which made its maiden flight on April 2 as the engine of China's first commercial liquid-fueled carrier rocket Tianlong-2. This is the YF-102 engine we have released. We can see that its construction is relatively simple, the number of components is small, a large number of mature material systems are used, and the new 3D printing technology is used. It is very suitable for the commercial aerospace field, said Liu Shang, chief designer of the 85-ton thrust open-type liquid oxygen kerosene engine under the Academy of Aerospace Propulsion Technology. The other 2 rocket engines are the YF-102V and the YF-209, which are still in the development stage. Because the rocket engine itself is a complex and very difficult project, it takes time to move from the stage of research and development to the stage of maturity. The transformation of aerospace products from the Academy of Aerospace Propulsion Technology we use will provide good support for the development of commercial rockets, said Yang Yuqiang, chairman of the Ka Space Industrial Base, China's first commercial aerospace industrial base.